Hello everyone, I'm Jonathan Little, and over the next few weeks, we're going to be going through hands from my World Series of Poker main event. Here we have Queen Jack offsuit, 73 big blinds deep in the cutoff seat, and I am definitely going to raise this up. You should pretty much always play this hand. The only time you would not play this hand is if you could just look and tell the player on the button, or maybe any player yet to act, is going to 3-bet you. If you just know you're going to get 3-bet and you know you're not going to get to see a flop, well then, folding's fine. But you should basically always be raising this. Playing about 75 big blinds deep, I typically prefer to make it a little bit bigger than like a min raise, because if you make it a min raise, you're just giving the players in the blinds amazing odds to call. So I think a 2.5, 2.6 big blind raise is probably ideal. All right. I raise, small blind calls, big blind calls, flop comes 10, 9, 5. 2 clubs, giving me a gut shot and a backdoor flush draw to the queen. So, what do we do here? Well, facing a 7,000 lead from the laggy, small blind, kid, and a fold from the player in the big blind, this player's range should be a whole lot of either very good made hands that are susceptible to being outdrawn, like 10-9. Really aren't a whole lot of other ones, right? He's probably not playing 10-5 or 9-5. Suppose he could also have something like bottom set, but the problem with that is that you really want to be checking bottom set so you can put in a check raise. So when the opponent does bet small like this, it makes me think his range is probably more draws, but also marginal made hands, like a 10 or a 9, that is essentially betting for value / protection, because it doesn't want to check and then call a bet. So knowing that, should I raise? And that's difficult to know against an unknown player, because if I do raise and the guy just has king 10 and decides to rip it all in, clearly that's terrible, right? Because when he makes it 7, if I make it, I don't know, 30,000, and he jams for 200 total, guess I have to fold, but I really don't want to fold. That said, in the main event, it probably is a little bit more acceptable to raise in the spot, because I don't think a lot of people are just ripping their stack in with a one-pair hand. And if he does have a one-pair hand like ace-10, if I raise the flop, the turn's going to be probably bad for ace-10 a lot of the time, and if the turn's not bad, the river's going to be bad. And those two things combined make it relatively easy for me to get him off of ace-10. So, thinking about this more, I think raising is fine. But if I thought the opponent was leading with a much more balanced range of just like really good made hands and junky draws, I'd be way more inclined to call, because I'm very live against the made hands and I actually beat the draws. So I do call. Turns the 8 of clubs, giving me a straight. Problem is the flush is available now. And now my opponent bets about half pot, 18K into the 41K pot. And at this point, I have the best hand almost every time. The question is, should I raise? And I'm basically never raising here unless I have a flush. And even then, I may not even raise the bad flushes, because think about this, right? If the opponent's leading the flop with his draws, well, the most obvious draw that got there on the turn that he'd want to keep betting is a flush. So if I have a straight here, as I do, if I raise and he has a flush, I'm just putting in my money drawing thin, or at least, well, thin or dead, one of the two, because I have the queen of clubs. So in this spot, if I am going to raise, I want to be raising with hands that beat flushes, or that have obvious outs to beat flushes that lack showdown value. But the neat part about this is that if I have ace high here, say I did call the flop with ace of clubs 5, which, I would have, I would not raise ace of clubs 5, because I still beat the draws, right? At least I beat some of the draws. Not a lot, but I beat some of them. And I also don't think many players are betting the flop with something like 8-7 and then continuing to bet on an 8 turn, like turning that into a bluff. So this is a spot where I think when the opponent does keep betting, he probably has a pretty good made hand or just a really bad draw. If he has a really good made hand, well, I don't want to raise with straights. And if he has a draw, I also don't want to raise with straights because he's drawing thin. So I love the call. River is now the 7 of clubs, and the opponent checks. So now there's 4 clubs on board. I have the queen eye flush, and the opponent checks. Should I bet? Well, going back to the thought before, if the opponent had a draw, very easily could be the ace or the king of clubs. That said, if he did have the ace of king of clubs, would he bet? And I actually think he would not on this specific board, because it is the 10, the 9, the 8, and the 7 of clubs on board. And if he did have something like the king of clubs, notice he loses to the ace, the jack, and the 6 of clubs. So now the king of clubs is actually not as good as it may naturally appear. So for that reason, I don't think I need to bet the queen, because when I bet a queen here, when the 10, 9, 8, and 7 of clubs are on the board, what am I trying to get called by? Well, I'm trying to get called by a 5 of clubs or worse. You really think the opponent's check raising a 5 of clubs or worse? I mean, I guess he could have like 5, 4 of clubs or something, but he probably doesn't have a whole lot of 4 of clubs, 3 of clubs, or 2 of clubs. So now I'm trying to get called by straights and sets and 2 pairs. You really think your opponent's going to call with straight sets and 2 pairs when it's very easy for me to have a flush here? Probably not, right? So this is a situation where I think I have a very clear check behind, even though normally in this spot, if the board did not contain 4 to a straight flush, I think the queen high flush would be a reasonable value bet because we're going to be against a whole lot of straights and weaker flushes. Like, say the river was a 2 of clubs, he could easily have something like a 7 of clubs in his hand or he could have something like the jack of clubs in his hand, right? But in this situation, I don't think there's any merit in betting. So I do just check it behind, and we win the pot against 8, 7 of spades. So, funny enough, I said I didn't think he would turn an 8 into a bluff on the turn, but he did. And that's interesting to note. It is good to see that he did lead the flop with a range that we thought would make logical sense, right? A junky draw, and on an open-ended, on a 2 flush board, a bad open-ended straight draw is a junky draw. Or I thought he'd have a very good hand, and that makes my play pretty nice. So this ended up working out pretty well. If I bet the river clearly, well, I presume he would fold. Maybe he's a calling station, who knows? But I like the way I played this hand. Notice if I raised the flop, he probably would have called. It would have gone check, check on the turn and then check, check on the river, so he would have ended up winning probably the same amount of money. But I don't really mind keeping him in the pot when he's drawing pretty thin against me. And the neat thing about the best draws, or at least relatively strong draws, is that if you beat the gut shot straight draws, notice I beat all of them here, on the flop, you don't necessarily need to bluff this hand by the river. Very often, queen high will win if your opponent is not so inclined to run too many triple barrel bluffs. That said, I have an opponent labeled as a laggy kid, so maybe he is. But the nice thing about being against a laggy kid is that if you make a straight, you're going to get paid off a lot of the time. This time we did get a little turn bet in, and we got a rough river, so we didn't get fully paid. But I imagine if this river was a blank, like the 2 of clubs, well, a card that would make my perceived range worse, like the 2 of clubs, or even if it was a blank, like the 2 of diamonds, this opponent very likely could have continued firing. But we got one of the few cards in the deck that were really bad for the opponent because it makes it very easy for me to have a hand that's not going to fold, so we ended up not winning too much in this hand this time. So that's going to be it for this episode. For this episode, what are we making here? That's it for this video for Poker News. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments for me, please let me know on Twitter at Jonathan Little. And if you like this video, go to YouTube, click like and subscribe. That goes a long way to helping other people know that people like these videos. Good luck, have fun, and I will talk to you next time.